fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mountain fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander while I feel thee, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. All else I adore your name. Above all else, to my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, to my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, to my heart to sing your praise. Above all else, I adore your name. Above all else, to my heart to sing your praise. The highest praise, the loudest praise to the name above everything. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel.
Well, good evening. My name is Jason Hollinger. I'm the preaching and community minister here for the Lufkin Central Church, and we have made it through another week. And as we come to Saturday night, tonight we're going to be talking about the book of Esther, and we will also show you a preview of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning. And just even this book of Esther alone, what I love from this book is there is just, man, I mean, you want to talk about drama. You want to talk about just this, this story that is constantly with just so many plot twists, everything that comes with it. It's better than anything network television can come up with, I guarantee you. And so, as we look at this story, as we look at everything that develops in this, one of the things that we'll point out in the video is that's very interesting is there is no mention of God in this book, and yet He is all over the place. And our challenge is to find Him there. But before we do that, let's spend a little bit of time in worship.
Jesus, hope of the nations, Jesus, comfort for all who mourn. You are the source of heaven's hope on earth. Jesus, light in the darkness, Jesus, truth in each circumstance. You are the source of heaven's light on earth. In history you lived and died. You broke the chains, you rose to life. You are the hope living in us. You are the rock in whom we trust. You are the light shining for all the world to see. You rose from the dead, conquering fear. Our Prince of Peace, drawing us near. Jesus, our hope, living for all who will receive. You are the hope living in us. You are the rock in whom we trust. You are the light shining for all the world to see. You rose from the dead, conquering fear. Our Prince of Peace, drawing us near. Jesus, our hope, living for all who will receive. Lord, we believe. Lord, we believe. Lord, we believe. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide His face, in his righteousness alone. Faultless stand before the throne. Faultless stand before the throne. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of
The Book of Esther. It's one of the more exciting and curious books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. And while some Jews did return to Jerusalem, remember Ezra and Nehemiah, many did not. And so the Book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The main characters in this story are two Jews, Mordecai and then his niece Esther. And then there's the king of Persia, who's something of a drunken pushover in this story. And then there's the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. Now, this is a curious book in the Bible, mainly for the fact that God is never even mentioned, not once, which might strike you as kind of odd. I mean, isn't the Bible about God? But this is a brilliant technique by the author, who's anonymous, by the way. It's an invitation to read this story looking for God's activity, and there are signs of it everywhere. The story is full of very odd, quote, coincidences and ironic reversals, and it all forces you to see God's purpose at work, but behind the scenes. Let's just dive into the story. The book opens with the king of Persia throwing two elaborate banquet feasts that last a total of 187 days, and it's all for the grandiose purpose of displaying his greatness and splendor. On the last day of the banquet feast, he's really drunk, and he demands that his wife, Queen Vashti, appear at the party to show off her beauty. She refuses, and so in a drunken rage, the king deposes Vashti and makes the silly decree that all Persian men should now be the masters of their own homes. Then he holds a beauty pageant because he wants to find a new queen. This is like a really bad soap opera. But it's right here that we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and enters the beauty pageant and wins. And the king is so obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to become the new queen of Persia. Now, after this, and even more serendipitous, is the fact that Mordecai just happens to overhear two royal guards plotting to murder the king. And so he informs Esther, who in turn informs the king, and Mordecai gets credit for saving the king's life. Now, right here from the beginning, God's not mentioned anywhere, but this all seems providentially ordered. What is it that God's up to? You have to keep reading. We're next introduced to Haman, who's not actually a Persian. He's called an Agagite. He's a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. Remember 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom, and he demands that everybody kneel before Haman. Well, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, which of course fills Haman with rage. And when he finds out that Mordecai's Jewish, Haman successfully persuades the king to enact this crazy decree to destroy all of the Jewish people. And to decide the date of the Jews' annihilation, Haman rolls the dice. A die is called pur in Hebrew. Tuck that away for later. 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. Haman and the king then have a drinking banquet to celebrate their really horrible decision. So the focus now turns to Mordecai and Esther, who are the only hope for the Jewish people. They make a plan that Esther's going to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a royal request is, according to Persian law, an act worthy of death. So in a key statement, Mordecai, he's confident that even if Esther remains silent, that deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. And then Mordecai wonders aloud. He says, who knows? Maybe you've become queen for this very moment. Esther responds with bravery, and she purposes to go to the king with her amazing words, "If I perish, I perish." Now, in what unfolds, we watch the ironic reversal of all of Haman's evil plans. So Esther hosts the king and Haman at a first banquet, and she says that she wants to make a special request of both of them at an exclusive banquet the following day. So Haman leaves the banquet totally drunk, and he sees Mordecai in the street. He fumes with anger, and he orders that a tall stake be built so that Mordecai can be impaled upon it in the morning. It seems like things can't get any worse for the Jews and for Mordecai. But all of a sudden, the story pivots. It just so happens that night, the king, he can't sleep, and he has the royal chronicles read to him for good bedtime reading, and he just happens to hear about how Mordecai had saved the king's life. He had totally forgotten. So in the morning, Haman enters to request Mordecai's execution, and the king in that moment orders Haman to honor Mordecai publicly for saving his life. So now Haman has to lead Mordecai around the city on a royal horse, telling everyone to praise him. Now this moment in the story, it's a pivot for the whole book. It begins Haman's downfall and Mordecai's rise to power. Watch how this works. The day after is Esther's second banquet. So the king and Haman arrive, and Esther informs the king that first of all, she's Jewish, and second, that Haman has enacted a decree to murder her and to murder Mordecai, who saved his life, and to murder all of the Jews. Now the king's had a lot to drink, so when he hears this news, he goes into yet one more drunken rage, and he orders that Haman be impaled on the very stake he made for Mordecai. It's ironic and a grisly way for Haman to go. Haman's execution, however, doesn't solve the problem of the decree to kill all of the Jews. So the focus now turns to Esther and Mordecai as they make a plan to reverse the decree. They discover that the king can't revoke a decree that he's already made. So instead, the king commissions Mordecai to issue a counter-decree. On the appointed day that all of the Jews were supposed to be killed, the 13th of Adar, now the Jews are ordered to defend themselves and to destroy any who plotted to kill them. Then Mordecai, Esther, and Jews everywhere hold banquets and feasts to celebrate this new decree, and Mordecai is elevated to a seat beside the king. Eventually, the decreed day comes, and the Jews triumph over their enemies. First, they destroy Haman's family, and then any other Persian officials who had joined in Haman's plot. And then on a second day, they get permission to destroy any who plotted against them throughout the entire kingdom. This results in joy and celebration as the Jews are rescued from annihilation. The story then tells about how Esther and Mordecai established by decree this annual 2-day feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance from destruction. And the name of the feast comes from Haman's dice. Remember, Purim. The book concludes with a short epilogue as Mordecai is elevated to second in command in the kingdom, and we are told now of his royal greatness and splendor as the Jews thrive in exile. Now, step back. Notice how this whole story has been designed. The story was full of moments of ironic reversal, but we can now see the whole story is structured as an ironic reversal, right down to the details. So the king's splendor and feasts and decrees are mirrored by Mordecai's splendor and feasts and decrees at the end. Esther and Mordecai, they first saved the king, but now in the end they save all of the Jews. Then you have Haman's elevation and edicts and banquet that gets reversed by Mordecai's elevation and edict and banquet. And then at the center you have Esther and Mordecai's planning scenes, and then Esther's 2 banquets that act as a frame around the greatest moment of reversal in the whole story: Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation. Beautiful. Another fascinating feature of this book is the moral ambiguity of the characters. There's a lot of drinking and anger and sex and murder, of which Mordecai and Esther are a part. Not to mention their violation of many commands in the Torah, like marrying Gentiles or eating impure foods. And so the story's not putting Mordecai and Esther forward as moral example, as if it endorses all of their behavior. But they are put forward as models of trust and hope when things get really bad. And so the book of Esther comes back to that question with which we began: why God is not mentioned. The message of this book seems to be that when God seems absent, when his people are in exile, when they're unfaithful to the Torah, does this mean that God is done with Israel? Has God abandoned his promises? And the book of Esther says no. It invites us to see that God can and does work in the real mess and moral ambiguity of human history, and he uses the faithfulness of even morally compromised people to accomplish his purposes. And so the book of Esther asks us to be willing to trust God's providence even when we can't see it working, and to hope that no matter how bad things get, God is committed to redeeming his world. And that's what the book of Esther is all about.
Well, hey, I told you this book had a lot going on in it. And even without the mention of God, we can see his activity all over the pages. And as I get to thinking about that, I mean, just how that speaks so much just to our lives as well. There are so many occasions where there is no mention of God, but we can look back and see God's fingerprints everywhere, all over it. And in many ways, what it comes down to is us looking to him as our source of strength, or our strength building plan, if you will. And that's what we're going to be talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning in our worship service. And we would love for you to join us as we continue through this journey, this series of finding the strength. And this week, I do have the video. I forgot to put it in last week, but I do have the video for this. And so watch this clip right now.
I have a friend named John Mark Hicks who teaches theology at David Lipscomb University in Nashville. John Mark's no stranger to pain in his life. His first wife died after complications from back surgery. He went through a separation and divorce from his second wife. He's lost a 16-year-old son who's passed away. And when I think about someone who knows what it is to find his strength in God, I think of John Mark, who's been quite open about these things on his own walk with God. But if you didn't know these things about John Mark, you wouldn't have any idea the depth of appreciation that you could have for his hope and his resolve in his walk with God in his life. Just last week, John Mark wrote something that I found quite applicable in the series that we're in right now. He writes this: in the movie Collateral Beauty, starring Will Smith, an elderly woman sits with a grieving mother. Along with her sympathy, she counsels the mother to notice the collateral beauty that appears in the midst of tragedy. I can't prove that this is always the case, and I wouldn't share it with a mother whose child's death is imminent, but I believe it's nevertheless true. Here is my confidence. I believe God is always at work in hidden ways, forming us into the image of Jesus, inspiring acts of kindness and courage, and revealing God's love in surprising and unexpected ways. I see it when neighbors help each other and care for the elderly on their street. I see it when healthcare workers exhibit courage and self-giving as they risk their own lives. I see it when people are more connected today online than they were in their previous busyness. I see it when life is simplified and when what is really important emerges in our practices as well as our consciousness. I see it when domestic workers who can no longer clean houses still receive a paycheck from their employers with a bonus. I see it when Amazon becomes a channel for gift giving to hospitals, to shut-ins, to out-of-work immigrants, rather than simply being pictured as a symbol of consumerism. I could go on. Perhaps you can add your own expressions of collateral beauty. Collateral beauty neither minimizes the pain nor turns it into something good. Instead, collateral beauty is a ray of light in the midst of the darkness. Collateral beauty neither heals the wound nor cures the virus. It does, however, offer hope in the midst of despair. And one of the things I love about what John Mark writes is that he writes against the background of his own profound pain and tragedy in his life, and yet he can still speak with integrity about spotting the collateral beauty in the midst of it all. Another reason why I love what he wrote is it had everything to do with where we were last week in Psalm 84. In fact, I would just call your attention to Psalm 84 again, because it's to this psalm we're returning right now, where the psalmist writes in Psalm 84 in verse 5, "Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs."
Well, I don't know about you, but I cannot wait for the rest of that message, and I pray it will be a blessing to you and your family and your friends, your neighborhood, your community, everyone. And I just pray that through this time that we can have this opportunity to be strengthened together as we find that strength that is that comes from God alone. Y'all have a great night. God bless.
Even when I fail you, I know you love me. Your holy presence surrounding me in every season. I know you love me. I know you love me. At the cross I bow my knee, where your blood was shed for me. There's no greater love than this. You have overcome the grave. Glory fills the highest place. What can separate me now? You go before me. You shield my way. Your hand upholds me. I know you love me. At the cross I bow my knee, where your blood was shed for me. There's no greater love than this. You have overcome the grave. Glory fills the highest place. What can separate me now? At the cross I bow my knee, where your blood was shed for me. There's no greater love than this. You have overcome the grave. Glory fills the highest place. What can separate me now? You tore the veil. You made a way when you said that it is done. You tore the veil. You made a way when you said that it is done. cross I bow my knee, where your blood was shed for me. There's no greater love than this. You have overcome the grave. Glory fills the highest place. What can separate me now? At the cross I bow my knee, where your blood was shed for me. There's no greater love than this. No, you have overcome the grave. Glory fills the highest place. What can separate me now? And when the earth fades, falls from my eyes, and you stand before